Thank you, Dr. Rice, for inviting me. It's great to be a part of this conference. It's an honor to be on the flyer with the other names that I saw there. If you were looking at the flyer or the advertisements and you looked down and saw my name and asked, "Who is that?" you're not alone, because I was asking the same thing. Say, who is that? By the way, I'm going to apologize right off the top for the sound of my voice. You can just consider this a midwinter Midwest accent. All of us talk this way up north about this time of the year. I wanted to say greetings from Moody Bible Institute. And when I've been introducing myself to several people at this conference, they ask me my name and where I'm at, and I tell them I teach at Moody, and almost immediately say, "Is that still a good school?" Do you mean after I went there, or is everything? My response is yes, it's a good school. All of the faculty at Moody sign a statement that we must hold to a pre-tribulational rapture without mental reservation. So no faculty at Moody Bible Institute has mental reservation, so that's always good. Make sure that they're up to speed that way. Finally, I want to say, too, I appreciate the opportunity to read my paper here. This is a version of a paper that I've given on several occasions now. And if you didn't go to the coffee with the ladies, you're probably going to wish you had coffee by the time my paper gets done. I'd like to start by doing something that's a little bit different from the other sessions. I realize that we've sort of had some very broad sessions today, talking about the history of Satan's tactics against the church. We've heard about, from Dr. House, very excellent presentation on Josephus and whether or not he supports the preterist view, some wonderful insights that we've already seen. My paper is on one single word, so it's a little narrow, you might say. As a professor, I'm constantly asking the students to narrow their topic down, narrow it down, and this is about as narrow as you can get. But it's one word that is found in the text, a text that you know well, but a text that bears reading, and I want to read from the text of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, beginning at verse 13. Paul writes, "But we do not want you to be uninformed, brethren, about those who are asleep, so that you will not grieve as the rest who have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep in Jesus. For this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore, comfort one another with these words." If that ever becomes commonplace to you to read that text without a thrill, you need to read it more often. By the way, here's another thing I'm going to warn you about with the slight cold I have. Every time I touch this little microphone, it's going to sound like, some fingers on a blackboard, so just get used to it. That's another thing, too. They got to crank this thing way up to even hear me at all, so it's going to be, if you start dozing off and you hear that, it's going to be, all right. Almost every dispensational scholar who holds to the pre-tribulational rapture has had to face what Charles Ryrie identified over 40 years ago as the intellectual attack. In brief, this attack, in one form or another, suggests that serious critical scholarship has, for some rather vague and other times some very technical reasons, abandoned the notion of the pre-tribulational rapture. This paper deals with one of those supposedly technical reasons. In his nearly classical work, Exegetical Fallacies, D.A. Carson exposes, among other word study fallacies, the fallacy of false assumptions about technical meaning. In this fallacy, an interpreter falsely assumes that a word always, or nearly always, has a certain technical meaning. Carson, of course, is dealing with instances where a term may or may not have such a technical meaning, and the fallacy is importing the technical meaning into a context where it's inappropriate. In a number of books and commentaries on 1 Thessalonians, the interpretation of apantesis in 1 Thessalonians 4:17 in the phrase "to meet," apantesin, the Lord in the air, might seem to qualify as an instance of this fallacy. As will be demonstrated below, the view that apantesis has a very specific technical meaning, a meaning that would prevent an interpreter from understanding what Paul is teaching, that Paul is teaching a pre-tribulational rapture, is widely espoused in the literature on 1 Thessalonians. This view suggests that 1 Thessalonians 4:13 through 18 is not describing Christ coming for the church, but his church coming for him. This view contends on the basis of a specific technical meaning of apantesis that Paul is describing not the bridegroom coming for his bride, but rather the subjects of the king going out to greet and to welcome the king to his kingdom. However, the question I want to pursue in this paper is this: can apantesis be an instance of the terminus technicus fallacy if the word apantesis is not actually a technical term at all? In other words, I will argue that 1. Apantesis is not such a technical term. That is to say, it does not have the full technical meaning confidently asserted by many. I will examine what I will call the full technical meaning proposed for apantesis and show that it is weakly attested, is actually contested by many scholars, which makes the confident assertion that 1 Thessalonians 4:17 is undoubtedly an instance of such a technical meaning a bit more than a little suspect, and that such a technical meaning claims too much for the word standing by itself, particularly in the light of other uses in the New Testament. In other words, apantesis on its own, apart from particular context, does not have a technical meaning such that one can determine the nature of the meaning indicated, much less the direction the parties take after the meeting. And ultimately, that last point really is the question. If it is a technical term describing a particular kind of meeting, then it can tell us which direction the parties will take after the meeting concludes. Where am I here? Dr. House did this, so I don't feel too bad about losing my place. In other words, this would be an instance of the terminus technicus fallacy if, in fact, the term apantesis were such a specific technical term. I will also argue that the supposed metaphor or picture drawn by those who understand apantesis in the full technical way does not do justice to this and the other texts which describe the prophetic events in view. My argument here is that the interpretive picture drawn by the advocates of the full technical meaning of apantesis confuses the rapture of the saints with the second coming, a very typical mistake of advocates of non-pre-tribulational views, and leaves the several texts that do speak of the rapture, as well as the Lord's relationship to his church, rather disconnected. In short, I want to ask which picture brings more texts together, and which draws a more biblically consistent picture: the view of those who imagine a technical meaning for apantesis, a formal reception for a dignitary, or those who understand 1 Thessalonians 4 as meaning teaching the rapture, the coming of Christ for the bridegroom, his bride, the church. This is going to be great. Yeah, sure does. Except I'm not sucking on a big stogie while I'm preaching, so. Are you with me so far? Let me begin with a brief synopsis of the view that apantesis is a technical term, and then I will briefly suggest what it means for the interpretation of 1 Thessalonians 4:13 through 18. I don't know which was more painful. This is going to be one of the memorable conferences, I got to tell you. All right, this is the synopsis of the technical meaning. In the simplest terms, the view of those who take apantesis as a technical term, in what I call a full technical sense, is the view that this term indicates a particular type of meeting. Meeting is the basic lexical meaning of apantesis. This is a meaning that would entail some rather specific proceedings. This is the key. Listen to these. It would take place between a delegation of citizens or officials and a visiting dignitary. It would take place just prior to the visiting dignitary's arrival at a predetermined specific location, often just outside a city. There would be certain formal preparations for this visit. The greeting party, so to speak, would take the initiative to go out from the city to receive the dignitary, and then they would escort him back into the city. It's this last detail that is the most significant for advocates of this view, for they would contend that this technical meaning precludes any view that that understands Paul in 1 Thessalonians 4:17 to be describing a pre-tribulational rapture. Okay, now I'm going to stick a throat lozenge in, and you'll hear it clicking on my teeth for the entire message.